Okay, today we're going to be making our stamps for the Adinkra cloth that we talked about yesterday. Last week, not yesterday. So here are some supplies that I have. I have the paper I passed out last week with some ideas and some symbols that are traditionally used. This is just for inspiration for you. You are going to get a wood block like this, and your name will be written on the side. You're going to get a small piece of foam that you will cut up, and of course a pencil and an eraser. I have a pencil here. A pair of scissors to cut your foam, some glue to glue the foam down onto the top of the block, and we'll start off with this paper to make some sketches for a design. So the one thing that you want to remember is that you are going to be gluing your pieces onto this flat piece so that when you stamp it down, the pieces that you've glued down are the shapes that will show up. The space in between the shapes will remain the color of the paper, which is white in this case. The other thing to remember is when you're gluing your foam, you can only glue one piece down flat. You can't glue two pieces on top of each other, because then the stamp will not be flat and it won't print properly. So you can't overlap foam pieces and you can't stack foam pieces. So just to give you an idea, if I look at some of these ideas here, I see simple shapes. I see triangle, I see a circle, but then there's a circle cut out from the center. I see a flower shape, and this shape is actually like an animal. So you can get creative with it, or you can be simple and use simple shapes. So I'm just going to start off by maybe in each corner, maybe I'll draw a little circle, and then maybe I'll start off in the middle with a diamond. But instead of making this diamond a solid shape, maybe I'll cut out a piece from the center. So this is not two pieces stacked on top of each other. This is the shape of a diamond with the center cut out. So this is a little bit of positive and negative space, which can be a little confusing, I realize. And then maybe I will, I don't know, just cut out some small triangles to put here. Okay, so that's pretty good. It's pretty balanced. You have to be careful, because if I draw a big shape on this side and a small shape on this side, then it's not going to be balanced at all. It's only going to have two very small shapes for my stamp, and it doesn't fit the space very well. So this is kind of not a good example. I could also do some sort of burst shape, kind of like a starburst or something. Cut the circle out of the middle. Remember, these are just examples. I could do squares in the corners. And then maybe a little teardrop shape here. I'm just trying to fill in the rectangle with simple shapes. So now that I have my shapes, I think I like this one the best. I'm sorry, my designs. I like this one the best. So I'm going to try to cut these pieces out. So the foam is a little tricky to draw on. You can if you want, but I see I'm going to need 4 squares. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut off a strip like this, and I'm going to cut this strip into squares. So I'm going to cut it in half and then in half again to give me my squares. Okay, so I've got my squares, and I want to see if they're the right size or if they're too big. So these, that's pretty good. So these rectangles on this paper are about exactly the same size as your wood block. Okay, but I'm not going to glue these on yet because I'm still working on my design. I like that I have some space on the edges and some space in the middle. So now I want to work on this shape here, and I might want to try to draw it out first. So like I said, it's a little tricky on the foam, but you can sort of scratch it in there if you want. And I can make some adjustments as I go, and I'm gonna draw that circle in too, but I'm gonna cut that out afterwards. So now I'm gonna carefully cut this out. Now you wanna save every piece of your foam, even the scraps, because you never know what you might wanna use or change. And I don't have a lot of foam, so if you can reuse scraps, if you end up needing to borrow a piece from a neighbor or something, it doesn't matter if it's the same color because it's not gonna show up that way. It's gonna show up the color of the stamp pad. Now to cut out this circle, this is a little tricky. What I'll do is I'll fold it in half. I'll make a little cut, not all the way because I don't want to cut past the circle, just enough to get my scissors in here. And then I will carefully cut this out. Now, having this middle part open is going to make my stamp design more interesting. So I'm going to carefully cut around, and I say carefully, I mean carefully because you're working real small. I don't want anybody's fingers cut off. Okay, so now I have my little sort of star shape that I made here. It looks a little different, but that's okay. And that'll go right in the middle. Now I see that I don't have room for these shapes here, and that's okay. So I have two options. I can make these squares smaller, which I think I might do. So just trim these down, make them a little smaller, like this. And then that's gonna allow me, now you see all these little pieces that I'm cutting? I might wanna use these. So I'm definitely gonna keep them and not lose them. Okay, so you know what? I'm even gonna change my design a little bit. I'm gonna use some of these little pieces that I have, and I'm gonna make like a sun, kind of like the rays of a sun coming off. I actually like that better. So you never know what you might get out of your scraps. So I gotta get all this to fit on here so you can kind of see what it looks like. Okay, now here's another thing. Your pieces cannot go off the edge. So if I have this piece and it's hanging off the edge of my block, it's not going to stamp properly. Everything needs to fit on here. So that might mean that I need to trim a few pieces that are too long. And I can do that as I'm going. So now I think I've covered up enough space on my block. I've got this nice open space in the middle. I've got spaces in between my shapes, instead of having one big piece. So now I'm ready to glue. So we're gonna be using this kind of glue, which is a roll-on glue. And you don't need much, okay? So you can see that it's wet there. So what I'll do is I'll take my foam piece and I'll just sort of rub it on the top and it'll get it wet. And then I will glue it. Now the glue is not gonna stick right away. So if you need to move your piece or straighten it out, then you can do that for a few minutes, but we cannot stamp with this until it is completely dry. And the cool thing about this is that the cap is like a holder, so you can just sort of stick it, back in the holder and it'll keep there for you. Make sure you push it down, maybe hold it, count to 10 in your head or so, allow it to stick to the wood. I think last year, if I remember correctly, we had some trouble with these pieces falling off. So, you know, don't be afraid to use a little bit of glue. I squeezed it just a little bit to make sure there was enough glue there. Make sure you get it right where you want it. Okay, and you gotta do this for all your pieces. I'm gonna put glue on this side, but it doesn't matter. I can flip it over and it's gonna look the same. I had already accidentally gotten some glue on there. Let me move these out of the way. Now this isn't something that you should do this quickly. I want you to put some thought into this, but I didn't want this to be a 10-minute video. So I was trying to just get everything, you know, to show you everything so that you could see it. Now here, remember, I have to make sure that my piece either stays on the block or maybe gets cut. I don't want it to go off the wood block at all. Make sure your piece is on there nice and flat. Otherwise it's not going to stamp well. Now the more little pieces you use and the more spaces you have in between your shapes and things, the more interesting your stamp will be. If you use 2 big squares and you glue them on here, it won't be as interesting. It'll just be 2 big squares and that's it. So we want to use little pieces and leave some spaces in between. Okay, and I think I have this piece left. Okay, and then I'm going to glue this. Okay, at this point, you want to again make sure everything is pushed down well. And we have to let this dry completely. Make sure everything's where you want it. You see, I can even move it still, it's wet. So if I need to adjust anything, now is the time. And then from here, I just need to let it dry. So I would put it on the corner of my desk and I would take out something from my art folder. And again, once I see that you've been working on something from your art folder for a while, then I will tap you on the shoulder and let you choose something from the art bin to work on. Next week we will work on stamping, but I'm hoping we can at least prepare our stamps today. So this is sort of the goal, is to try to cut them out. The last thing I'm gonna say is, if you're having a hard time with your design and it's not working out the way that you drew it, just maybe use your foam sheet and just sort of cut out some random pieces, some small pieces. Okay, so right now I'm just using my foam and I'm cutting out some just shapes, some circles, some triangles, some things like that. Then from these shapes, what I can do is on another block, I don't have another one right here by me, but I could start to sort of arrange the shapes in some sort of a way using the pieces that I had cut to make an interesting design. So if you're not able to sort of visualize it and draw it out, cut up some small shapes and start moving them around on your block until you get something you like.